Hi, everyone. Welcome to Green School Week 3, Botany. I love seeing all the answers to the question, if you could be a plant, what plant would you be? Um, I saw my answer in there, which is I think if I had to choose a plant, I would be a giant redwood. Although my favorite plant name to say is Chamaecyparis passifera foliifera aurea, or the golden thread branch false cypress. It's not my favorite plant, but I just love the sound of that Latin name, Chamaecyparis passifera foliifera aurea. Um, Anyway, I love the answers in the chat. The redwoods, the daffodils, the wild rose, the wildflowers, the cottonwoods, the sunflowers, the tomatoes. I was a little surprised to see wild onion in there, but interesting. We'll have to talk about that, Wayne. I want to know more about why you'd want to be a wild onion. Peace lily, blue spruce, sunflowers, live oaks, blue globe thistle. Anyway, there's some great answers in there, and that's just kind of a fun question. So, anyway, I hope you learned a lot about botany in the online lesson this week, from plant classifications to taxonomy to nomenclature, scientific names, plant families, species, varieties, all of those things. And then, of course, plant growth and development. I'm guessing that you learned a few new vocabulary words as well. There's a lot of vocabulary involved in the botany lesson as well. Well, last week we talked about soils. This week is another foundational course that we'll build on as we move through green school. But before we jump into botany, just a reminder that there is no review session next week, so I hope that you have a nice Thanksgiving holiday break with great food and creating even better memories. We will be back the first week of December, though, to talk about trees. So enjoy a week off, and we'll see you. I can't believe we're talking about December already, but we'll see you back here in December to talk about trees. And one last time, I'll remind you to complete the Green School form by November 28th if you have not already. Over 500 of you have. Thank you so much. But we do want to see 100% participation in this so that we can send you your certificate at the end of the Green School class in March. All right, let's talk about plants. That's why we're all here, right? Tonight's speaker is Sherie Shaffer. Sherie is from CSU Extension in Pueblo County. She's the county director there, but previously served as the horticulture specialist and the master gardener coordinator, dating back to 2015 when she began working with CSU. Sherie has a master's and a bachelor's degree from CSU Pueblo, both in biology, and her graduate research centered around the molecular taxonomy of an endemic wildflower species, Mirabilis rotundifolia. Sherie specializes in food gardening, composting, seed saving, and sustainable landscape practices. Also joining us tonight are our panelists. Thank you to Heather Hauk, CSU Extension La Plata County, for joining us, and Lisa Mason, CSU Extension Arapahoe County horticulture specialist. Thank you, Lisa and Heather, for joining us. And again, my name is Chris Hilgert. I will be joining you, and I'll be your primary host throughout Green School. And Stella is not joining us tonight, but she will be joining us tomorrow morning for the Thursday session. So with that, I hope you're ready to talk about botany, learn about botany. Again, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions during tonight's class. We'll do our best to answer those questions, and Sherie is going to take it from here.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for everyone for tuning in today. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everybody can see my presentation now. So like Chris was saying, botany is really, really foundational. It's a really great base of knowledge that I think is going to take you through the rest of the course with a strong start. So I do want to say it's a lot of information. That's something I've been teaching this review for quite a few years, and that's one of the biggest bits of feedback I got is it's just a lot. It's a lot of stuff to take in, a lot to remember. But I just want to tell you right off the bat here, don't stress out. You don't have to remember everything. A lot of the stuff that you learn in the botany module it's going to be built on in upcoming modules. So, take it in as you can. Don't stress about it. It's a good base, and it's also a really good base for some of the volunteer work that you'll be doing as a master gardener, should you be on that track. And so, I'm going to try to point out some stuff from the module as we go that I think is useful to your volunteer work that you'll be doing eventually in your counties. So here's our equal opportunity statement. Extension programs are available to all, and if you'd like to learn more about that, please visit our website. So I have the review broken up into the three different parts that your module is broken up to, starting out with classification and taxonomy. We are going to be doing some activities in Poll Everywhere. Not sure if you all have done that yet this year, but I'll guide you through it and give you plenty of time to get set when the time comes. So don't stress about that quite yet. But let's dig in. So when you first started the botany module, you learned about all the different ways we classify plants, and boy, are there a lot of ways to classify plants. So let's just review a few of those since there were so many. We should touch on them and make sure that those are fresh in our minds. So we can classify plants by use. Are they edible plants or are they just ornamental? You could even break ornamental down further into, turf, trees, flowers. You could just, there's so many ways to classify things. Potted plants, are they house plants? And then house plants, are they flowering house plants or just for their foliage? So lots of ways in the way we use plants that we can break them down. And of course, climatic requirements are another way we can break plants down. So temperature, do they require a tropical climate or a more temperate climate? Cool and warm season crops, that's huge, especially maybe when you are advising folks on when to start their vegetable garden. That's something important for a master gardener to understand that some vegetables are cool season and some are warm season, and we don't want to be advising folks to plant their warm season veggies in March, let's say. So that's just an example of a reason why it would be good to know different seasons of plants. And then of course hardiness. Again, when you're helping out people with plant selection or something like that, we definitely want to take plant hardiness into account and their location that they're wanting to plant. One of the big ones for me is ecological adaptations. I think that's a huge way we classify plants, especially in the work that we do as extension specialists and as master gardeners, helping folks out. So, ecological adaptations are referring to the habitat that a plant is adapted to and the conditions in that habitat that the plant is adapted to exist in. So, you don't want to put an alpine plant in a xeric habitat. That's not going to work out well. So those are very important to understand and a very important way to classify plants, especially for us. I really wanted to just stress the note that was in the module about native plants not referring to a political boundary, such as a state, but it's rather an ecological habitat that we're kind of talking about because, a plant that is native to Colorado might do really well here in Pueblo, but maybe not so well up in the mountains, but it's all still Colorado. So you can see how that would cause issues thinking of, a political or boundary like that. One of the biggest problems that I've seen in my time working at Extension, just generally speaking with folks and their plants and the problems they have when they come in to talk to us, is that they're trying to grow a plant outside of its natural environment. It really boils down to something pretty simple, and they want to grow something that requires acidic soil or something like that, and that's just going to cause nothing but problems. So something to keep in mind as you start to help out the public with their gardening questions. We can also break down plants into, their stem and leaf characteristics. So is it an herbaceous plant or is it more woody? This can help us with ID of a plant. Is it deciduous or is it evergreen? Broadleafed or needle-leafed? All of this can really help us with ID and also, if there's issues occurring with the plant to try to help us boil down what's actually going on here. Of course, I want to just stress to you that evergreens do drop their needles occasionally. That's something that was in your module as well. And another very common call that I think we get probably around the state, definitely here in Pueblo, is what I can speak to, is needle drop, which is totally normal. Sometimes not, but a lot of times, yes, it's totally normal. So, yeah, just wanted to bring that up as well. Okay, so now we're going to go into our first poll everywhere activity. So I believe the link is in the chat for you. You can also, I have them here on the screen. So if you go to just a web browser and go to pollev.com/greenbook708, or if you would prefer to use your phone for the poll everywhere activities, you can go open up a text message and send Greenbook 708 to 22333. And those are both on the screen. So I'm going to pause for a second and let everybody get into poll everywhere. And then we're going to be using it for knowledge checks and a couple just little kind of fun activities to stay engaged as we go through the review this evening. Wait just a couple more minutes and hopefully everyone is navigating over to poll everywhere. Okay, so hopefully a lot of folks have hopped on over to Poll Everywhere. And our first question, first little knowledge check that we're going to do, let me activate it, is, sorry, let me switch my screen share here. Hopefully you're seeing Poll Everywhere now. So which of the photos are considered a needle leaf plant is the question. And you can just go ahead and click on the photos that are, and I see some answers. So we've made it to Poll Everywhere. And I'll give everybody a second to answer still coming in. It's looking good. Awesome. So yes, it looks like we're doing great on this question. The answer is that A, B, D, and H are considered needle leaf plants. Sometimes we kind of miss H, that juniper. It's a little different looking than the others, but it looks like a lot of you did get that. So great. Thank you so much for your participation. I am going to switch back to the presentation. Okay, awesome. And we will move on. So some more ways that we can classify plants. Growth habits. Is it a tree, a shrub, a vine? This is important when you're advising folks that come into your local help desk or, at a booth out at an event. Because this is going to influence placement. If they're looking for a plant for a place where there's some restrictions overhead, whatever that might be, then we kind of want to know, like, is this going to grow as a tree, a shrub? How tall is this going to be? How wide is this going to be? Is this going to be a good fit for this person? So that's helpful when helping with placement and selection of a plant, if that's something that you're helping folks with. And also with pruning and maintenance, it's good to know, should we have a strong central leader? Is this supposed to grow as a tree or, should we prune it more like a shrub? And how do we maintain this plant? When is it going to set buds? We don't want to prune off buds. So, and these are all things you'll learn more in other modules. So don't stress too much about that, but just kind of want to give you an idea of why this information might be useful. Lifespan is another important way to classify plants. So, of course, annuals, biennials, perennials, you learned about those in the module. And understanding with lifespan can help a lot with management. And I'm thinking weed management here, which again, you're going to have a whole nother lesson on. But, if we're dealing with a weed that's an annual versus, or, is a summer annual or a winter annual, Is it a biennial? Is it a perennial? These are all going to change the way we would maybe suggest that folks manage those plants in their landscape. So it is important to understand those different categories. So this one is kind of just for fun, not necessarily a knowledge check, but I thought instead of asking where are we coming from tonight, we would do it in a very plant way and ask what zone are you coming to us from? So go back over to Poll Everywhere and type in which zone you're coming from. And if you don't know, you can scan the QR code on the screen and type in your zip code, and you can pull up your USDA hardiness zone there. So we've got a few 6As, a 5B, lots of 6As. Awesome. Six. We got a seven. Okay, cool. And a four. All right, awesome. We've got some spread here. That's great, but definitely looks like 6A is the big one. Definitely a few 5Bs. Okay, awesome. It's kind of fun to see where our fellow Green School participants are coming from. So thank you so much for participating in that. All right, so taxonomy. It's another way that we kind of break down plants into their similar groups. So this is naming and placing organisms into similar groups, plants specifically that we're talking about here. Um, as Chris had mentioned in the beginning, I did my master's thesis on molecular taxonomy of a plant around here in the Pueblo area, and I don't really like taxonomy after that. I maybe it had the opposite effect on me than was supposed to, but um, it's kind of, as there's more scientific discoveries with DNA and taxonomy changes all the time. And some things that we, thought were very closely related, we find out genetically are more closely related to other plants. So taxonomy is changing all the time, and that's really interesting. And it's confusing to get a grasp on when you're trying to really dig into it, but it really is interesting. So just breaking down kind of the very broad taxonomy of plants, we of course start with the plant kingdom, and that includes all plants. We can break that plant kingdom down into the non-vascular plants like our mosses and the vascular plants, the ones that have a vascular system, xylem and phloem, like you've learned so much about. We can break those vascular plants down further into gymnosperms and angiosperms. Angiosperms being flowering plants and gymnosperms being more of our cone producing plants. And then we can break down those angiosperms into monocots and dicots, which is a distinction that you learned about in the module. And I want to do a little thought process here in Poll Everywhere. So I'll switch back and I want to know, why do you think it's important for master gardeners especially to be able to distinguish between monocots and dicots? What are your thoughts on that? And that should be active for you over in Poll Everywhere. Give everybody a few minutes. Okay, awesome. So I see some good answers here, and you're probably seeing them as well. But yeah, I think the big one is herbicide usage. There's definitely some herbicides that are going to affect, monocots versus dicots differently. So, regardless of our own feelings on the usage of those in our own landscapes, definitely important to know all the options so we can present the facts to people and let them make decisions about what's best for their situation. Um, I see, identifying plants. Yes, that's definitely huge. That's a great starting place. Um, yeah, I think those are kind of the big ones, and you guys nailed that. So really good job on that. We'll pop back over to the presentation. Okay. Boiling down the taxonomy a little bit more. So now we're getting into smaller, more similar groups with plant families. So plant families are distinguished by characteristics in their reproductive structure. So they have similar flowers and things like that. Members of a plant family also share similar cultural requirements and pests and diseases, which is a reason that being familiar with at least some of the big plant families in your area or at least some of the big plant families that see, common issues can be really helpful to you as you start to kind of get a good feel for the kinds of questions that people ask, the kind of pests that they see, the kind of issues they're having with their plants. Yeah, just knowing which plants are in the same family can kind of give you a head start on some of that sometimes. From family, we can go down another level, and the plants are even more similar, and that would be genus. So, plants within a genus have more in common with each other than they do with other genera in the same family. So, we're just getting more and more similar. And then, of course, from genus, we break it down even further into species. So, that's a subgroup of a genus that differentiates from other members of the same genus. I really like the analogy that was in the module that the genus is like the last name Smith. All the Smiths might share a certain characteristic like blue eyes. And then the species name would be like the first name, John. John is different than the other Smiths in certain ways, but shares some certain characteristics. So I thought that that was a nice kind of little memory tool, I guess. Um, but as far as formatting goes, unlike, John Smith with the specific name coming first, we start with genus when we're writing a Latin plant name. So genus first and then species. For correct formatting, genus should be capitalized and species lowercase, and the name should be italicized. So that's the proper formatting. And of course, you learned that, you know, there's issues with common names when it comes to plants because they're not consistent across areas. One plant can have a bunch of common names. One common name can refer to a bunch of different plants. So to be very specific, it is important to know Latin names at least to an extent. And as far as pronunciation goes, I was pretty impressed with Chris earlier this evening saying that plant name. But I think my best advice that I ever got from one of my professors was if you say it with confidence, people will believe that that is how you say it. So I would go with that. So let's do a little knowledge check here. Back to poll everywhere. Which of these two ways is correct to write this Latin name of this plant? And there's two options on the screen for you. It's on the slide and it is on the poll everywhere screen. Awesome. And the results are looking great. You are correct that A is the correct answer. B is incorrect because populus, the genus name, should also be italicized. So great job on that. Hop back over to the presentation. Okay, and that actually wraps up classification and taxonomy. So I'm going to pull up the Q&A and see if anybody has any general questions on what we just went over or anything from that classification and taxonomy section in the module.
There are no questions in the Q&A right now.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Looks like we're all good. All right, let's dig into plant structures then. Okay, so plant structures, we're going to start at the basic, most simplest level of a structure, and that's a cell. We've learned since we were, in high school biology that the cells are the building blocks of life, and it still holds true now in green school with plants. So the cells are going to contain the genetic matter for a plant, their DNA, organelles, which, as the name implies, are tiny organs inside the cell that are completing cellular functions that the plant needs to live and grow and thrive. One of those organelles is the site of photosynthesis, which is an amazing process that plants go through that is quite impressive. And I want to do a little knowledge check as go back over to Poll Everywhere and ask which organelle is the site of photosynthesis. So that should be active. All right, got answers coming in. And great news, 97% of you have got the right answer. The chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. 3% had indicated that they thought the nucleus was the site of photosynthesis. That is actually the organelle where the genetic material will be found, the DNA. So not the nucleus, the chloroplast. Really good job on that. Head back over to the presentation. So that cells, they're doing, like I said, the cellular processes that need to be done. And then we move up a level to tissues. So tissues are groups of cells that are similar in function. They're performing similar functions within the plant. Um, and we are going to do one more little knowledge check here on this slide. Which type of tissue conducts water and nutrients throughout the plant? So dermal tissue, ground tissue, or vascular tissue are the options. And I will give you a couple minutes to go ahead and put your answer in. Awesome. And it looks like 100% of folks have gotten the right answer, and it is the vascular tissue. Yep, that is correct. And we'll dig in a little bit more to vascular tissue here in a moment. Okay, so yes, we covered tissues. And now groups of tissues that are working together to perform a common function are structures. So now we're getting into the structures that we actually see when we look at a plant, and those are the roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds. And we're going to go over each one of those in a little bit more depth. So we'll start with roots. So important, the hidden heroes of the plant. I feel like they're so overlooked because you don't really see them when you look at a plant, but they're so critical for plant health. Um, so we've got the cross section here just showing kind of the inner parts of the root hairs being a part of that epidermis and helping with absorption. And then the kind of bigger view of the root here, just kind of some of those different parts. So you learned a lot about roots in the module. I think the big takeaways for a master gardener, somebody going through green school, just without the master gardener component, is that roots need oxygen. That's a big one that I feel like is maybe a little bit news to people when they take this course. They absolutely do need oxygen, and that's why we have issues when we have compacted soil, heavy soils, or we're overwatering and taking up pore space. So roots needing oxygen is a big takeaway that I think from this part of the module. And that many plant problems start at the roots. And you're going to learn so much more about this in the tree module, but it's really probably a pretty large percentage of issues really start at the roots. And the other thing that I think is a good takeaway is that root spread can be really far. And that's important to consider when we're talking about, tree care and where is the proper area to water a tree, thinking about just how far those roots can spread, especially when we're in a heavy clay soil like we do tend to have in a lot of places in Colorado. Those roots will spread even farther. So that was another big takeaway that I wanted everybody to get out of this part of the botany module. So we're going to do a little word cloud now in Poll Everywhere. I want you to just in one word, when you just think of roots, what's the one word that comes to your mind as far as their function? And I'll give everybody a minute. So the way the word cloud works is the more times that somebody types the word, it'll be bigger. So if there's words that are coming up multiple times, they'll show up bigger in the word cloud. And we're getting lots of words in right now. So it looks like the biggest word by far here is nutrients. And yes, absolutely. The roots are going to be responsible for taking up nutrients from the soil for the rest of the plant. Absorption, same thing. I see water. I see foundation. I see anchor. Minerals, yes. Pipeline, love that one. Highway, I like that one too. That's a good one. Feeding, yeah, the roots can also be food. Absolutely. So awesome. There's so many really great answers here of what comes to your mind when you think of the function of roots. And that's just, I love to see what everybody's thinking. Oh, stability is a big one in foundation. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. All right, so let's go to stems. Another very critical part of the plant, obviously. If you didn't watch the videos in the botany module, or if you have yet to do the botany module, definitely watch the videos because I think that they do a really great job of just driving some points home and kind of making them really click. So definitely watch those videos, and if you already did, then you know that the video discusses primary growth is getting longer, stems getting longer. All plants go through this. That growth starts at the tip of the stem, at the apical meristem in this area. And then secondary growth is getting wider. Not all plants go through secondary growth, mostly woody plants. And that's, the why we see the growth rings on the trunk. So that's very cool, very interesting to know. And I really, of course, love the analogy that she gives in the video that primary growth is when you're a kid, you get taller, and secondary growth is when you get older and get a desk job and you get wider. That really, I feel like, is a good memory tool and kind of funny. So, um, those are the two types of growth. A couple considerations I wanted to just point out. Growth points are important to consider when you're advising somebody on pruning. And the video kind of goes through that, that if you take off the terminal bud, the growth is going to start from the next down lateral bud. So you can kind of envision how the plant will grow after being pruned. And I think that's an important consideration to make and why it's so good to have this base of knowledge before you are, dealing with kind of real world problems. And then secondary growth is important to consider. Of course, if you're advising somebody on staking a tree, you don't want to leave that on for a very, very long term because of secondary growth, and it will end up girdling the tree, which can definitely cause a lot of harm. So those are some kind of real world takeaways for the STEM part of the module that I wanted to point out. So over here, there's this stem that's kind of labeled with some of the parts, and they're definitely good parts to be familiar with, just again, just for having that good base. So the terminal bud at the end, the lateral buds. The terminal bud scar is so interesting, and ever since, I mean, forever, I've been showing my kids like terminal bud scars when we're at the park picking up twigs. It's just really interesting to see where the last year's growth started. And you can tell a lot about the history, the growth history of a twig or, even a plant by looking at a stem and looking for those terminal bud scars that are kind of accordion shaped scars on the stem. And that's where the plant stopped growing last year. And then, from that scar to the terminal bud is how much it's grown in this season. So it's really quite interesting to take a little peek into the history of this stem. And I wanted to go, this activity works out a little better in my head sometimes, but I have on Pull Everywhere a little photo of a twig, and I want you to try to mark the terminal bud scars. There's like three, two or three that I think you can see. So I'm gonna clear the responses a couple times just because it gets a little bit crazy, but just so everyone can see the picture. But yeah, it looks like you're in the generally right areas there. You can definitely see that first one, that accordion like scar is, yep, pretty large, and then there's a couple a little bit further down. So yeah, it looks like we got the gist on that. And you can identify what those terminal bud scars look like. So great job on that. Okay, and now we're on to leaves. Another super important part of the plant, performing lots of important things to keep the plant alive. Leaf arrangement is one thing you learned about. Alternate leaf arrangement being one leaf per node, opposite being two leaves per node, and whorled being three or more per node. So that's really important, an important concept and vocabulary to be familiar with when for plant ID, especially if you're going to be using like a field guide or something like that, or maybe you're going to delve into Native Plant Master after your green school adventures. Those are definitely terms that you would want to be familiar with. And then defining a leaf versus a leaflet, I think that's another important thing that you learned in the botany module. And to know if you're looking at an actual true leaf or a leaflet, you're going to want to look and see if the petiole is attached to the stem at a bud node. So, like this image here, we have a stem, here's a bud node, and the leaf is coming out right there, attached right there at that bud. So, this is a true leaf. But down here, for example, this pinnately compound leaf, it would be attached to its twig right here at a bud node. So this whole thing is the leaf. And these individual blades are the leaflets. They are not attached at the bud node. So that's why they're leaflets, and the whole leaf is this whole structure. And that's something I think that I just wanted to review with you. As far as veination goes, on leaves, monocots are have parallel veination, so those veins are running parallel to each other, whereas dicots have pinnate or palmate veination. So pinnate being kind of what we see here in this diagram, and palmate like a maple leaf, kind of extending from one central area, like your palm. So that's a really, I probably the easiest way to just look at something and say monocot or dicot is leaf veination, in my opinion. And then of course all the parts of the leaf that we have over here, the blade, the tip, and there's so many leaf shapes, and I didn't even really want to dig into that because there's just so many, but definitely a cool thing to know how to look up, and not something at all that I would ever suggest that you memorize the name and all the different possibilities of shapes, but definitely just know that there are a lot of shapes and where you could possibly look up those shapes should you need them in a plant ID situation, I think is the big skill that you need to learn there. So back over to Pull Everywhere, and there is a diagram of a leaf on the Pull Everywhere screen, and I want to know if you think it's a monocot or a dicot. So I will give everybody a moment. Awesome. So most everybody got that right. This is a monocot leaf, and you can tell because oh, am I sharing the? I think I'm sharing the right screen. Sorry, I lost track. You can tell because of the parallel veination in that leaf, and it would be a different veination pattern if it were a dicot. So great job on that. I think I was sharing that screen. Okay, so those that we just went over, the roots, stems, and leaves were the vegetative structures of the plant, keeping it growing, thriving. Now we're going to talk about reproductive structures, and obviously reproductive structures are going to be the things that help the plant reproduce and make more plants. So the first reproductive structure we'll talk about are flowers. Obviously critically important to reproduction of a plant. They're going to attract pollinators in a lot of situations. Once a plant is pollinated, that's going to lead to fertilization, which is going to kickstart the reproductive cycle for the plant. So we've got a diagram of a flower here, just a very simple diagram that just kind of shows all the different parts of the flower, um, from the male reproductive structures to the female reproductive structures, the petals, the sepals, all the things that you learned about in the module. One thing that I don't believe was in the module, but I just wanted to touch on, and again, if you're going to be using, like Flora, the field guides to be identifying plants, maybe if that's something you want to get into, or maybe you're already into it, the position of the ovary in a flower is something that comes up sometimes in those kind of guides. So I wanted to just briefly go over it. It's pretty intuitive, but an ovary can be inferior, superior, or partially inferior. So if it's inferior, the ovary, like this third diagram here, lies below the attachment of the other floral parts, so like the petals and the stamen and things like that. If it's superior, it's above the attachment of those parts, or it can kind of be surrounded by those parts, and we call that partially inferior. Again, just a little tidbit, nothing you need to memorize, definitely won't be on any tests, but I just thought it was an interesting thing to show you. And a little quiz, a little knowledge check for you now. We'll go back over to Poll Everywhere. And which flower organ produces pollen? The stamen, anther, filament, or pistil? Okay, this is interesting. I love it. I'm gonna give everybody just like another few seconds to get their answer in, and then we'll talk about this one. One of our closer splits in answers here. So, I have the correct answer down as B, anther. That is the part of the stamen that specifically is producing the pollen. I can see why you would put stamen. The anther is a part of the stamen. So, I'd say partial credit on that one. But anther is that actual structure producing that pollen, and the filament is kind of holding it up in the air. So, yeah, really great job. We didn't have any other of the other two answers, which I think are less correct. So, great job. And then fruit, another reproductive structure. It's kind of crazy to think about fruit as a reproductive structure when we probably mostly think about it as food. But fruit evolves from a maturing ovary after it's been pollinated and fertilized. So, just a couple types of fruits that I thought I would just show a photo of. We have a simple fruit, which is just as the name states, pretty simple. One fruit formed from one ovary and one flower. And the apple is an example, and we can kind of see like on the colors here that this blue becomes the kind of flesh of the apple that we would eat. So really simple, one fruit, one flower, one ovary, simple. But then we have some situations that are a little more complex. So an aggregate fruit is a fruit that is formed from a single flower with many ovaries. So not all flowers are built the same. They all have very different structures, and this flower will just so happens to have many ovaries within a single flower. They get pollinated and fertilized and then fuse into a single fruit, which is the raspberry. And then even a crazier situation, in my opinion, is a multiple fruit, which is a fruit developed from a fusion of separate independent flowers that are born on a single structure. So a pineapple, all the little, sections of a pineapple that we see in the pineapple that we eat, it was an individual flower that was pollinated and fertilized and matured and fused together to create one fruit from many different flowers. So lots of different ways this can happen depending on the plant and its structure. And we reap the benefits a lot of times with very, very delicious fruits, and the plant gets the benefit of, spreading its seeds theoretically. So fruits are very important to everybody. Oops, let me go back. Did we have, no poll everywhere on this one. Okay, and then we have seeds. So, maybe my favorite reproductive structure. So it's just so amazing to me that there's an entire complete new plant in a seed with the protective cover just ready to go when the time is right. So, of course, a seed stays dormant until the time is right, until the conditions are right for germination. And in the module, you learned about a lot of external and internal factors that trigger the seed to know that it's time to germinate. So that's really interesting. Definitely take a peek at that table. I think it's really, really cool, just all the different ways that a seed, will prevent itself from germinating when it's not a good time to germinate. So I'm a little bit of a plant nerd, obviously. Probably most of you are too. So you probably think that's cool too. Um, but yeah, so let's do a word cloud. Speaking of those different factors that would influence a seed to germinate. Go ahead and type in one that comes to your mind, and we'll see which ones come up the most for folks. Give you some time to type that into poll everywhere. Awesome. We've got a lot of answers coming in. And it looks like temperature is the big one. Yep, definitely one that we always think of. Water, like moisture levels, absolutely. Um, oh yeah, I see some really cool ones like scarification, you know, light, minerals, time, warmth. Yes, awesome. Fire. Oh yeah, that's super cool one too. Fire. That some seeds will actually need that before they're ready to go. So awesome. So many different things, so many different cool ways that plants trigger their seeds to grow. Awesome. So that's all I have on plant structures, which is the second of three of our little sections. Looks like questions are currently answered. I'll just hang out here for like 30 seconds and see if any pop up, but I think our awesome panelists are covering those pretty well. Thank you so much. All right, seeing none, let's move on to plant growth. I feel like this is kind of where we start putting it together a little bit, and kind of seeing the big picture of a lot of stuff that we've learned. So, these are the big three in this third section: respiration, photosynthesis, and transpiration. These processes that you learned about that are each and every single one critical for a plant to grow and thrive and live. So, starting with photosynthesis, you learned that using carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, the plant makes glucose and oxygen. So the glucose is the food. When we say plants make their own food, they do photosynthesis and make their own food. We're talking about glucose. That's the food for the plant. When photosynthesis is limited, obviously growth and vigor of the plant are also going to be limited. So keep that in mind. We're going to do a couple little scenarios here in a minute, and I think that you'll want to keep that one in mind. Respiration is like pretty much the exact opposite of photosynthesis. Respiration is going to use that glucose and oxygen, not only from the air, but from the soil as well, which again, I'll stress that again. Roots also need oxygen. Soil oxygen is very important for respiration. So yeah, using the glucose made in photosynthesis and oxygen from the air and soil, the plant makes energy, and then carbon dioxide and water are byproducts. But the real product here is energy for the plant to do all of the processes that it needs to do to live and grow. And then transpiration. So transpiration is the loss of water through the leaves, which I don't know, sounds kind of simple and insignificant, but it is so not what you learned in the module. It really is critical and absolutely necessary for a plant. That loss of the water through the leaves is going to suck everything up from the roots and bring it all through the plant. So that's going to be critical for the movement of minerals that are absorbed by the roots to move through the plant, for cooling of the plant, and for turgor pressure. A plant just simply wouldn't stand upright if it didn't have transpiration happening. So that transpiration is a very, very critical process. And as you learn about these three processes, I think the big takeaway that I would want you to keep in mind is just how thinking about how if any of these factors are limited, what effect is that having on the plant in general, on its health, on its growth, on its vigor? What effect would that have? And we'll think through that a little bit with some scenarios. But yeah, that's kind of the big takeaway that I have. So we're going to do a scenario now. It's on the screen. I'll kind of read through it. It's a very, very common thing that could absolutely happen at your local county help desk. So a homeowner calls about a tree in their yard that leafed out fine this spring. And now it's late June, however, and the leaves are beginning to wilt, dry, and are already falling off. They just moved into the home last fall, so they don't know a lot about how the landscape was maintained prior, but other trees in the yard are showing similar symptoms. And they do know that there has been prolonged drought in the area for the past 2 years. So we're actually going to use the chat for this one. We're actually done with poll everywhere for now. Maybe you're happy about that, maybe not. But if we can open the chat briefly, I want to hear your thoughts on why are the leaves drying even though they were fine this spring? Let's start with that one. Hopefully you're able to put that in the chat.
I think Chris has to unlock or open, re-enable, because I think it's disabled to everyone
Okay,
during the presentation. So Chris, if you
The
get a second,
chat
that'd be great.
is open.
There we
it's
are.
open. Okay, there they come. I see the answers now. Thank you. Okay, awesome. I'm going to give everybody a chance. The answers are coming in quick. I'm going to skim these a little bit. I see a lot of water related answers. Love that. Yes, okay. Drought, soil compaction. Awesome. I'm seeing lots of really, really good answers. So I think you guys pretty much got the gist of this, but the prolonged drought that they indicated and the lack of watering that we can assume happened in the last few years probably damaged the root system, which reduced the amount of water and nutrients that the roots could absorb. And the reason it probably leafed out in the spring is because there was sufficient soil moisture and rain in the spring. It's not as hot, so not as much stress on the plant. There were also, and I saw a couple people mention this, there were probably stored nutrients from the previous year that allowed the tree to go ahead and leaf out in the spring. But once those temperatures did get hot in June, that compromised and reduced root system was no longer to bring up sufficient water and nutrients to sustain the tree's needs. So that's probably why we were seeing damage once the weather started to warm up. And yes, great answers in the chat. Really good thinking through. So there's a second question to this. What plant process or processes have been interrupted? And I did see a couple people already answer that, but if you didn't, go ahead and type your thoughts into the chat. Yes, love what I'm seeing. Awesome. Awesome. This group is really getting this. So, just like what you're seeing in the chat there, photosynthesis and transpiration have been interrupted. Um, Photosynthesis requires water, obviously, which we just learned, and we don't have it in a sufficient amount due to that reduced root system. In addition, the stomata on the leaves have probably closed to reduce evaporation of moisture from the leaf surface, and this is going to decrease water moving from the plant, so transpiration is going to be decreased. And also, those stomata closing are going to reduce the amount of CO2 that can come into the plant, which is also going to reduce photosynthesis. So it's kind of a double whammy for photosynthesis there. Um, yeah, and then obviously just since the stomata are going to close to conserve water, we're not going to have as much transpiration when those stomata are closed. So those are the two plant processes that were disrupted. Okay, we've got another whole new scenario here. A homeowner planted a shade tree 2 years ago in a landscape with heavy clay soils, which we're no stranger to, right? The tree has never really thrived. Now it's showing dieback, mostly in the lower part of the canopy. And they're asking the advice of you, their neighbor, a Colorado master gardener, who noticed that the tree had been planted about 6 inches too deep. And you're going to learn about what's too deep in the tree module. And the homeowner has been overwatering, trying to bring the tree back. So again, in the chat, give me your thoughts on what is causing the dieback and what plant process is being interrupted. Give everybody a second. All right. Again, really good answers. This is a really great group. So, oxygen, lack of oxygen. That's the big one I'm seeing. Suffocating roots. Awesome. Great. Great, great, great. So yeah, because that tree was planted too deeply and in heavy clay soils, another double whammy, right? The roots are not getting sufficient oxygen. And then the overwatering is making it a triple whammy because now we're filling up any available pore space in the soil with water instead of oxygen. So the tree is just definitely suffering from a lack of oxygen to the roots. Um, and then I guess maybe I should have put this as a second question, but what plant process is being interrupted? I'll give everybody another minute or so to chime in on that. I saw a couple, but awesome. Looking good. Yes. So as you learned, um, oxygen is needed for respiration. So that's the big one here that's being disrupted. And I can see your point on photosynthesis too, because if we're not making the energy from respiration, it's probably going to affect photosynthesis as well. But I think respiration is directly being affected by the lack of oxygen to the roots. Um, how could that actually be fixed? That's a good question. I just saw somebody put in the chat. It kind of depends. Let's see, a year ago, 2 years ago, I don't know that you could raise that tree up. I think definitely without, compromising the root system even more, maybe though. But I think definitely want to stop overwatering so that we stop taking up all of the pore space with water instead of oxygen, and maybe just try to focus on really good general tree care, which you're going to learn about in the tree module. But sometimes when you have a tree that's been planted too deeply for a while, unfortunately, not a lot you can do. But yeah, so it is a hard one. Let's see here. Okay, let's move on to talk about some growth factors here. So, factors that affect growth. Light is obviously a big one. You learned that red and blue light are the most effective at encouraging plant growth, and obviously, right, because green light is being reflected. Most plants appear green to our eyes, so they are reflecting that green light. You also learned about the 7 degrees of sun and shade. I love that chart because, I saw somebody had put something in the Q&A on how do you interpret, partial shade and yeah, how do you interpret that? And what does that really mean? And, you need so much more information. Like, is this plant heat tolerant? If not, maybe we want that shade in the afternoon. And that those 7 degrees of sun and shade really kind of broke that down. Like we want morning sun, afternoon shade, or full shade, or there's just there's so much more than we really get just from the information that's readily available at the nursery sometimes. So, this is definitely something to consider. Light levels and light penetration when advising on pruning. Maybe we need to prune to increase light penetration, and for plant placement as well. Like we kind of just talked about, like, some afternoon shade is going to be better. So let's think about where we're going to place this plant in somebody's landscape. So those are kind of some real world reasons to know about light and how it factors into growth. Water, I mean, obviously, right? Water is a big one. Water shortage can cause reduced growth. You're going to have wilting. You're going to have reduced cooling, and just generally, the plant is not going to do well if it's having a lack of water. So, or too much, really. You really kind of got to find that sweet spot. And sometimes the overwatering and underwatering can look pretty similar. So, getting it right is pretty important. Temperature, I think, is the microclimate thing is very interesting. Do we have some reflected heat from like a rock or a building or something? Or what's the exposure? Are we planting this on the north side of the house or the south side of the house? Or, are we down in a valley? Are we up on a hill? All these things can make a microclimate and something to consider before planting for sure. And then of course you learned about that when temperature drops below the hardiness of a plant, the hardiness temperature that the plant can kind of take, then we're going to see plant injury. And that's why it's important to know your zone and know the zone of your local area and maybe the surrounding areas in your county so that you can help folks out with choosing plants that are going to overwinter, or if they're not going to overwinter, make a plan for that. All right. And then, of course, you learned about hormones. So, another thing that is so cool to me that tropisms and how they work and how plants, hormones influence plants to grow upwards or to grow toward light. Such cool stuff. So, just like we do, plants produce chemicals that regulate growth processes. They're called hormones. And like I mentioned, they do play a role in the direction of growth via tropism. So if the tropism is responding to gravity, it's a gravitropism. If it's responding to light, it's a phototropism. And yeah, just some really cool stuff that you get to dig into in this course and really learn about why things happen. And we have another little scenario here. I think it has two questions. So here's our scenario. A client that comes into the master gardener office planted a 2-inch caliper balled and burlap shade tree 3 years ago, but it still hasn't really taken off the way it should. They believe they did everything right when planting the tree, including pruning some of the top off of the tree to balance out the compromised root system. So in the chat, why hasn't the tree come out of transplant shock and put on more top growth? And how are hormones playing a part there? See some answers coming in. We'll give everybody a little chance here. Awesome. So let's see. I see a lot of people pointing out that the burlap should be removed, so that's good. Um, let's see. Oh, yes, this latest answer that came in is great. Cut off the terminal buds. Absolutely. That's a good thought. Roger from this old house. That's an interesting one. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Good answers here. So, yeah, when the homeowner planted the tree at transplant, they uh they also reduce the amount of auxin present in the top of the tree. And since auxin stimulates root growth, the root system did not grow quickly. And with less root growth, fewer gibberellins were being produced, which stimulates tip growth. So as a result, we're getting less top growth and the tree is just not going to be thriving and taking off the way that this homeowner probably hoped that it would. One more question on this scenario. Would fertilizing help? Does this tree need fertilizer? What are your thoughts on that? Lots of no's. Lots of no's. An LOL no. Yeah, I like that one. Um, so yeah, no, fertilizer is not what we need. Fertilizer is going to typically encourage top growth, and what the plant really needs right now is root growth. We need to focus on the roots. And again, so overlooked and something that you'll have to help people out to realize that sometimes out of sight, out of mind, but we really need to focus on root health, and it's foundational, no pun intended, for the tree. So that is what I've got on plant growth. Let me pop the Q&A open. Looks like we are all handled at the moment, but we've got plenty of time. It's 7:08. I'm going to just stop talking for a minute, and if you have any questions, we can address them in the Q&A box. But if not, I just appreciate you coming and listening to my review tonight. I hope it was helpful. My email is on the course intro page. If you haven't gone through it yet, or you're thinking about something later on that you would like clarification on, I'm super happy to take emails and work through any questions that you have. Okay.
Sherry, I can keep typing answers, or did you want to look through those? A few have come in since you asked about it.
Yes. Yeah, let's see. Chris marked this top one live, so let me dig
Hmm.
into this one. But yeah, feel free to answer other ones, Heather.
Okay,
Thank you.
you bet.
So I know you can reduce watering when a plant is dormant, but when a plant is slowly entering dormancy and say the temperature is all over the place, does it help to keep watering normally? Um, I would say yes. I mean, here in Pueblo, we have not really had any cold weather, and I know we've had like a couple little flashes. But yeah, I think as long as you can keep watering normally, that's great. I think the more you can fall and winter water, the better. And of course, you want to wait, and you're going to learn more about this in following modules. But of course, you want to wait until it's appropriate weather-wise to fall and winter water. But yeah, the more you can get plants moisture going into the winter, where it's probably going to be pretty dry. Like, let's be real, it's not super moist in the winter pretty much ever, at least around here in southern Colorado. So yeah, I'd say the more you can kind of get the water in while you can, the better. Why are some leaves almost a black color and not green? Oh, like the purplish kind of black color. I don't um I think that it's something to do with the different pigments. I honestly don't know if I have the perfect answer for you. If anybody else has a great answer for that, otherwise happy to kind of dig into that and get back to you.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sherie. It just different plants have different pigments in them that are expressed more than others. The chlorophyll being the main green pigment. Um, I don't know the name of the purple pigment in plants off the top of my head, but like
Yeah.
carotenoids or orange pigments, and there are other different colored pigments. So it depending on the plant, they express um, different levels of pigments, which express different colors that we see.
Purple's one of my favorites, Chris. It's anthocyanin.
Perfect.
Ah,
That's
good
You
to
right.
don't ask me to
know.
spell it right now, but I know that it's anthocyanin because I'm an eggplant lover of old school.
Oh, okay, okay. I do love those trees too with those dark purple leaves. My kids call them spooky trees, but I don't know.
Right? Right. And anthocyanin is what it is in that leaf tissue to help it turn purple. Same with like those, oh, what are they? Like the purple potato plants.
Sure.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yes,
And like
awesome.
a
Awesome.
purple leaf elderberry.
For sure. So let's see. I'm just gonna jump into a couple more of these. I see somebody asking about explaining winter watering. Yeah, it's so important here in Colorado, and we've got fact sheets on it, and I'm pretty sure that this is gonna probably get covered in the tree module for sure. But yeah, it's really important. We tend to have dry winters, so just very generally speaking, when we're going to have a stint of nice weather in the fall or winter, we definitely advise people to water their trees for sure. But I also would say lawn and most perennials could probably use a little splash when we have and I guess it depends on how much moisture we're actually getting, but typically it's not enough, at least where I live anyway. So yeah, and it's just gonna make and if somebody's having an issue with the plant and they come in and it's always a good idea. They're gonna see so much progress, I think, if they can do that versus if they never have fall and winter watered and they don't if their tree is struggling or something like that, I think it's always going to be just such a great idea. So, the impact of the fall spring. So I assume we're talking about the very mild fall we're having here. That can definitely have an impact on the health of I think particularly trees. And again, I think you'll cover that a little bit more in the tree module. But um, yeah, just on just the dormancy and there's other triggers than temperatures. So trees, I think it can be maybe confusing, so to speak. If anybody else wants to jump in on that and have any other thoughts, feel free.
To me, in my landscape, it's like, well, I've already blown out the sprinklers, so
Yeah.
this warm weather is great. I'm enjoying it, but it also means that I'm dragging hoses around to water my trees and plants that, you know, as
Hmm.
much as I love this warm weather, it would be nice if we would freeze and maybe get some snow or some precipitation. Maybe there's some of that coming
Yes.
in the next week or so, but yeah, to me, that's been the biggest impact is just like the need to water.
Yes.
And like I said, since I've already blown out my sprinkler, my irrigation system, I'm dragging hoses and sprinklers around to make sure my plants are getting water, especially my newly planted trees, shrubs, and perennials, and any bulbs I may have planted this fall.
Yes, for sure. That's such a great point. And I think I've blown out my sprinklers 3 times already because I keep thinking, okay, we're going to be good after this. But no. So-
Y'all just need to come to Durango, where it's been raining and it's snowing in the
Really?
mountains
Oh my
already.
gosh. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. I didn't know.
Glorious.
Okay. This is a good question. Photosynthesis sequesters CO2, but respiration creates CO2. Is this at a lesser rate? I honestly I don't know. Lisa, do you know the answer to that? Did you want to?
Yes.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I started typing out an answer and I thought, well, this will be a good one to
Yeah.
talk about. My understanding, I think it can vary a little bit. Um, But generally, so photosynthesis sequesters CO2 at a greater rate than respiration releases CO2. And another factor that goes into that is, plants, especially forests, can store that carbon for a long time. So they become like these carbon sinks. So in general, the CO2, or let's see, let me start over. In general, photosynthesis sequesters CO2 at a greater rate than respiration releases CO2.
Okay, awesome. Good to know. I actually had no clue about that. Thank you so much. And what a great question. Like you guys are really thinking big picture here. I love it. Okay, I think we've got through them all, team. Oh, hold on. Um, can you review some ideas for regenerative care needed for plant growth? I suppose maybe we're talking like after an injury or maybe if we could get a little clarification on that. Okay, so poor landscape soil. So, yeah, totally. I think that that was probably maybe covered a little bit in the soil module, but yeah, it really depends on what the situation is. I think a soil test, if you think that the poor landscape soil is the culprit of your issues, you really need the soil test to figure out what's going on there. I don't know, sometimes when people are like, no, a soil test isn't for me, I guess generally recommending plant-based compost is a good thing. Trying not to break down the soil structure as much as possible. So, not over tilling. Those are kind of general things I could say. But yeah, I think you definitely would want to get a soil test from our amazing soil lab and see what's actually going on. It's not something you could really just look at, and it's pretty interesting. If tree is waterlogged and in clay soils, would you recommend aerating around it and above the roots? I think you can do that. I would just definitely caution to you don't want to damage the roots if you're already in a situation where you have the clay soil and they're already waterlogged. Um, we don't want to risk any more root damage. So that would just be my one caution is being sure you're not damaging any roots and that would be the reason I would be like a little bit careful about that. But it's definitely a good thought.
Find a local arborist if you have any
Yeah,
concerns.
definitely. Always good. Always good. All right. Well, I think we're all good. Like I mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out via email if you think of anything else that I can help you with.
Awesome. Thank you, Cherie. Thank you for talking us through this botany lesson. There's a lot of information to cover, and students, thank you for the great questions. Can tell that you are paying attention, reading the material, and really asking some thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. So, thank you for that, for making our evening that much more interesting. So hopefully we did a good job of answering your questions. We're going to send you out with a song, and we have one more question for you. Tell us in the chat, what was the most challenging part of the botany lesson for you? Let us know, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.